The Obama administration has slammed the release of confidential documents by the whistleblower site WikiLeaks. But what happens when the White House itself is implicated in the leaking of secret information? Back in 2002, before the invasion of Iraq, US intelligence agencies were seeking evidence that Saddam Hussein still had weapons of mass destruction. Former Ambassador Joe Wilson was sent to Africa to investigate claims that Iraq was trying to get uranium ore from Niger. He found no evidence, but early the following year, George W. Bush went public with the claims. That prompted Joe Wilson to write a newspaper article contradicting the president. The fallout included the leaking by the White House of his wife Valerie Plame Wilson's status as a covert agent for the CIA. Their story is now a movie, Fair Game. I spoke to Valerie Plame Wilson and Joe Wilson in Los Angeles. Valerie Plame Wilson, you've gone from being a covert CIA agent and also a very private person, I understand, to someone who's in the spotlight and having your life portrayed by Hollywood on the big screen. How do you reconcile that contrast?
I find the whole experience really surreal. It's been very strange. I did go from being a very private person to literally overnight being a very public one, and I find it a challenge.
What can you reveal about your role with the CIA?
My expertise was in counterproliferation. In the run-up to the war with Iraq, I and my former colleagues were looking at the Iraqi scientists, their presumed WMD programs, trying to figure out what was the state of their R&D, where were they procuring these items, and so forth.
Joe Wilson, you were sent to Niger to investigate claims that yellow cake had been shipped to Iraq. You found no evidence. Why did you later write that op-ed article, and did you consider the impact it might have on your life and that of your family?
I wrote the article because the entire case for war, the serious strategic case for war, was predicated on this slogan, "We can't afford to wait for the smoking gun to come in the form of a mushroom cloud." It was the whole case of weapons of mass destruction. And when I learned that, in fact, the president built part of that case on intelligence that later turned out to be bogus, intelligence that I'd taken a look at the request of the CIA, it became apparent to me that the administration had simply not been totally truthful with the American public, and somebody had to hold them to account.
Valerie Plame Wilson, do you remember how you felt that day when you realised your cover had been blown in Robert Novak's newspaper column?
It felt like I had been sucker punched in the gut. Immediately, I'm thinking of the assets, my network with whom I worked with over the years. I'm thinking about the security of my family. Our twins at the time were 3 years old. And, of course, as a parent, their safety is paramount. And I knew, of course, my career was over immediately. And I think the movie does a very good job in that scene, and watching it is hard all over again.
Valerie.
What?
Wilson never worked for the CIA, but his wife...
As an agency operative on weapons of mass destruction. He just went ahead and did it.
Does this run overseas?
It's in the newspaper, Valerie. It's on the...
No, Novak's column. Is he syndicated overseas?
It's everywhere.
Joe Wilson, do you understand why the government would go to such lengths to discredit you and also involve your wife?
Well, I can understand why they would go after me. That was their style, and that has actually been a style. There's an old saying here that if you can't beat them with the facts, you just go after their characters and confuse everybody. What was really unprecedented in modern sort of political disputes, at least, is this idea of dragging my wife into it, dragging family members into it. That generally does not happen. Unless you're perhaps a candidate for office. And it's very clear they want to do a couple of things. One, they wanted to silence the analysts out at the agency who were beginning to leak about how they'd been pressured to shape their reports. And two, I think that they may have actually seen this as an organized CIA effort to discredit the White House. They may have actually just sort of misunderstood what the initial article was and those days that we generated that discussion.
Valerie Plame Wilson, there are some personal challenges portrayed in the movie, difficult times in your marriage. Are they accurate?
Yes. Yes. It is very, very painful to see your spouse being called a liar or a traitor. I was accused of nepotism, and it was said that I wasn't covert, that I was just a secretary and so forth. And all of these things were out of our control, and there was all this media maelstrom happening just outside our front door, literally, in sometimes with the photographers right there. And of course, it has a very serious impact on your personal relationships, and how do you navigate through that?
You talk about the CIA being too political now. How effective is the US intelligence community?
I'm sorry to say I don't think it's nearly as effective as it should be, given the billions of dollars that have been thrown at it. In typical American fashion after the 9/11 attacks, there were some reform efforts, but the reform really came in the form of more money, which doesn't necessarily mean it's any more effective. It is still politicized, perhaps not as much as it was, but it really is a question of infrastructure and responsibility, power. As you can imagine, Washington is filled with bureaucratic turf wars. And what gets caught in that is we have seen in the United States there have been several incidents over the last couple years of very, very close misses of terrorist actions. And it turns out it was what's been called systemic errors. There's some real problems, I think, in our intelligence infrastructure.
And I think one of the issues that is really touched on in the movie is the extent to which analysts were badgered in the run-up to the Gulf War to shape their conclusions on political decisions and political trends, rather than allowing the decisions to flow from the facts as the analysts presented them. So they had the whole process really backwards.
Joe Wilson, with the benefit of hindsight, if you'd known what was going to happen, would you still have written that opinion piece?
Oh, well, sure. As I said earlier, it is fundamental that you hold your government to account for what your government says and does in the name of the American people. This is a momentous decision to send our fellow citizens off to kill and to die in the name of the American people. And we, the American people, had a right when we were making that decision to understand the facts, not be told a bunch of half-truths and misstatements and actual lies to justify this engagement of our blood and our treasure.
Joe Wilson, Valerie Plame Wilson, thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you very much.